just when you thought you were a good person, right? This gospel reading comes along and reminds us that sometimes we struggle even just to be like boilerplate, like normal human being, right? So often in the spiritual life, it can be tempting. We want to, like, I don't know, do the Jesus prayer and see the uncreated light, or do great ascetical feats or something. This is why fasting is always a temptation for our ego, right? To do more fasting, right, than we can handle, or as much as our ego thinks we can handle. And so we're reminded that a lot of the spiritual life is merely trying to live up to some sort of minimum decency of what it means to be a human being. Now, Jesus, in this teaching, in this gospel passage, stresses this idea of, that there's not really much credit, or at least the kind of credit and self-praise we think is due for things like loving those who love us, right? Or especially loving those who can give back to us. And we realize that this love that this degree of love that we extend to other people, right? Well, things like I'm going to lend to you, and so I can get something back. That this kind of love is not sufficient. One of the ways to describe the kind of reciprocity that Jesus is describing, right, in this text, is that it is a kind of relationality that could be reduced to the transactional. Right? That it's like, well, I did this for you, you do this for me, right? Like I helped you out when you were down, you helped me out, when I am down, right? And this is very good, right? Like, we have to at least act like this, right? As a family or a society or as friends, because anything less than that devolves into discord, conflict, and even eventually violence, right? If we don't do that. But what Jesus is calling us to do is something much, much more radical. And so we see this throughout the entire Gospels, that whatever the Old Testament was asking us, right, Jesus increases that really all the way. Maybe one good example of this is like the commandment to tithe, right, to give 10% of our money in the Old Testament. And so it's 10% in the Old Testament. What is it in the New Testament? In the New Testament, it's 100%, right? And so what you see is what God wants is all of us, right? And so the kind of giving, right, that Jesus wants is also indicative of the kind of relationship or the kind of spirituality that he's trying to call Christians to, which is one where we don't just give God 10% of our heart or our life, we give 100% of it. And so that giving of 100% of all of us is standing in contrast to this more transactional kind of relationships that he is pointing out. And not to criticize those, but what happens is that we substitute that sort of mere humanity, right, for some sort of maybe like, well, we think that that's all there is, right? We don't aim higher than that. And Jesus is really asking us to imagine a much deeper, more profound way of loving each other. And we know that we need that kind of love, right? We know that we need a love that transcends sort of pure reciprocity with each other, because there's at the very end, I love it. It sticks out to me every time I read this passage. It says, because God is, right, merciful, right? And that word mercy, if you really wanted to translate it, I think as accurately as possible, would be like loving kindness, right? Is really the best sort of translation of the word that we usually put into English as mercy, right? That he is merciful even to the ungrateful and the selfish, right? And the response to that is, thank God he is, right? Thank God that God, like, because like if God only loved me in the measure that I deserved or I could give back, then I'm in trouble, right? And we know this all the time. We know that we're always in trouble like that we need people to extend to us at certain times a love that goes beyond what we deserve or what we could give back to them. And we're all in points in time where we're like that. Like if I'm a dear friend to you, that friendship means that even when you've, like, let's say maybe you're a friend of mine and you've gotten into a really bad addiction and you're not listening to me and you've been a real jerk to me, it means that even in that moment when I know that you will reject my love and that you will not be able to give it back in return, nevertheless, I'm still going to reach out to you, right, in that moment. And so we need that kind of love when we're like infants and little children with our mothers and fathers. We need it when we're old and our family is taking care of us, right? We need it when we're sick and we can't do anything back. And so there's so many times and examples where we need to be loved like that. And one of the things we recognize even more is that it's not that God will love us like that, but the very fact that we already exist, right, as a free gift, right, of life is already a sign that God has given something to us that we could scarcely give back. That even in the shedding of our own blood in martyrdom, that itself would also not quite be able to repay the debt of existence that we've been given. And so we already stand in a place of undeservedness and of extreme gratitude. And so Jesus reminds us that this is how he wants us to love others, the way that he loves us. And that means all of us. One of the things I think is helpful to think about of God wanting all of us in all of our heart is, well, first, this is what we want out of relationships with other people, right? That's what we also want. We want all of that other person, especially in the most kind of intimate relationships that we have. Like, we want our mother and our father to be all in on us, right? And when they're not, it goes very bad. We need that from our spouse, right? We maybe need that for maybe our best of friends, right? And so we're challenged to do that same. And this kind of love can really be called an agapic love, right? In that it's a love that is desiring to give, right? Without possessing and without receiving anything back, right? This is sort of this sacrificial love, we could also call it. Now, if you are not willing, I know this is going to be a hard saying, if you are not willing to die for the person you love, if you're not willing to die for what you truly believe in and what you're committed to, then that means you have a price, right? That means you can be bought at some point. So what this reminds us too is that this kind of love does always require in it, at least in the background, some kind of commitment to martyrdom. And so this is why martyrdom is so central to the Christian faith, is because it is in many ways, the fullness or the completion of the kind of love that Christ, one, demonstrated for us, obviously, right, on the cross, dying for us, right, as a martyr, bearing witness to his love for us, and that if we love in that same way, that means we're willing to love to that point, right? And so this is a radical call that we realize that maybe if I work my whole life at it, I might be able to get a glimmer of the kind of love that Christ showed us, right? Because what is that? To love in return, right? To someone who couldn't possibly give you anything back that you don't already have as God, to sacrifice in that way for us, even when we were enemies of God, right? That he was willing and did in that moment die and shed his blood for us. That is, who of us would do that? Who of us would shed our blood and die and make a sacrifice with our life for a stranger, and especially for somebody for whom we hold resentment and bitterness, who we would describe as our enemy? That kind of sacrifice he lays out before us, right? And that's why we're here every Sunday, because we realize that kind of love is a journey and a great work to do. and that it is too hard to try to go that spiritual path alone, right? That it needs support and help. And so this month, we're focusing a little bit of a theme on stewardship, right? Which has to do with giving and our money, but also of all of the resources, right? And all the wealth, both physical and immaterial, that we possess, right? That this gospel message is a reminder how when we give, right, that to the church or to the poor, that we always do it not in a transactional way. We do it because, and this is important, this is what the whole practice of almsgiving and sacrificial giving to a parish is supposed to be, is that it is a practice, right, in acting out our gratitude, right, for all that we have been given, to act out, to give in a way that out of a place of gratitude and even joy, right? The kind of joy, this is what we aim for, we're trying for, is to give our money away to the church and to the ministries that it does, or to the poor, in the same way we would lavish or spend money on somebody that we're in love with, or the way grandparents would spend money on their grandchildren, right? There's like a joy in that. That's what we're aiming for with how we use our money and how we give it away. That it is a cherished opportunity to love someone else and to participate in that same sort of agape sacrificial love of Christ that he gives to us. And we're able to do that when we give, right? We don't give first and foremost because the church needs money to get stuff done. Though that's obviously a practical need, right? But we do it first and foremost because it liberates and frees us. Because it changes us. Because it enables and allows us to give and love more freely, and to be able to break out of the sort of mere reciprocity, right? Or a more transactional way that we relate to people, that we're able to be free of that and free to be able to love the way that Jesus does with no limits. Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory.